in a bull market, okay, most people who gonna looking for new coins, you're gonna see like in CoinGecko, hey, this is Hedron, it's not even 1 Satoshi. You know, to reach 1 Satoshi, you need 100x. Like, come on, man, it's obvious. Like, it can do 1000x, 10,000x. Why not? You know, like 10,000x from now, it's like, wait, 1, 2, 3, 4. You need to reach 1 cent, it's 10,000x. Okay?
Okay.
So
Okay.
whatever.
That's easy. That'll happen. Easy. That's amazing. That's why Hedron's a blessing, man. We're at the right time, man. We're at the right place, man. Ladies and gentlemen, get your Hedron started in Icosa.
Beautiful.
I think we're going to see between like a 25 to 50, $60 hex at the end of this next bull market. But yeah, I think the X factor in Hedron is going to be more from this point in time.
What's giving you that valuation? Not to be a bear or nothing, but what makes you think it's going to get that high?
I've heard some calculations in the T-share rate and how basically there's like a ceiling, right? That's like, what is it, 35 times higher than it is right now. And like if all things were equal, Hedron should actually be 35 times more expensive than it is right now. I don't know the math and how that works out. I've just kind of, picked up on some alpha in here. It's just a guesstimate based on the law of diminishing returns in regards to Bitcoin's first bull run and versus its second bull run, and how it was a reduction of like 5 times. So it had 5 times less of an X factor. And if we did apply those same numbers to Hex, then that's basically how I came up with that.
In Icosa on the testnet, I've only got a choice of 30 days. In production, are we going to have a choice of being able to stake Hedron for a longer period of time?
So there's no actual like set stake length or max stake length. It's just there's a minimum stake length based on your place in the bonding curve. So whether you're a whale, shark, dolphin, or a squid, you have a 360, 270, 180, or 90-day minimum. And then anything below a squid has an automatic 30-day minimum. So you have like a minimum stake length, but there's no set stake length or maximum stake length. So, providing you set out your minimum, you can go for as long as you want. It's just whenever you choose to end it.
So I don't have to define how many days. It's just a minimum.
Yeah, and that minimum is auto calculated based on the size of your stake relative to the total supply of the token. And there's also a bonus at the end of the stake based on that same bonding curve. But the bonus is calculated at the end. So you could start as a whale and have a 360-day minimum. But by the time you end and you're looking to say, hey, I want to get out now, even if it's, in 2 years, you don't have to get out after a year. But whenever you do choose to kind of eventually want to get out, it essentially then sees what rank you are, sees where you are in the bonding curve again. And let's say you'd be knocked down to, say, a dolphin, you'd now only have a 10% bonus instead of a 20% bonus as the whale. So you can either add more capital to the stake and boost yourself back up to a whale. So you can kind of try and get that 20% bonus. But then when you do that, it's going to reset your minimum to another 360 days, starting at day 0 again. So there's the kind of nuance to the way that the minimum stake length and the bonus are calculated using the same bonding curve, but at different points of the stake.
Thanks, man.
If you do get diluted, right, you start out as a whale and you're less than a squid, but you want to be able to end your stake at, say, 30 days because you're no longer that whale, then I think you need a little bit of liquid Icosa to be able to reset that. Is that correct?
Yeah, so essentially, if, for example, you staked as a whale today, 360 days would be a minimum. Let's say, I don't know, in 100 days, you are now a dolphin or a squid or whatever other class lower than whale. You could essentially just add a minimal amount. You wouldn't have to necessarily add one. Just add enough that it's not going to boost you up a rank. So just whatever you add, make sure that the cumulative amount of your principal now is not boosting you up. And then it would reset your stake length and you would essentially be knocked down and have a new shorter minimum. So in that example, if you had a new minimum of 30 days, for example, you'd now have served 100, you'd have another 30 to serve. So you'd have got out of jail essentially for 130 days instead of having to wait to 360. So yeah, there's like, it can, when you add capital, it can either increase or decrease your minimum stake length. But in the example that you want to be boosted back up, you obviously then have to add enough that the total cumulative principal of the stake pushes you back up in the bonding curve. So you can then try and ride out that minimum again and get that higher bonus at the end.
Will I be able to scrape the Icosa from my Hedron stake and then start staking that in the Icosa staking?
Unfortunately not. You'd have to end the stake. All three of the stake, you know, the Watsa, the Icosa, the Hedron, you can only get the yield once you end. And obviously with the Watsa, once you end, you're out for good. You know, assuming you end after the 14th day, which is probably going to be the case because there's probably not going to be much yield in the first 14 days worth ending for. You're then out forever, so you can't get back in the Watsa. But yeah, in all three pools, you have to end to get the yield.
So on day one, is there any Icosa in existence, or is it going to be day 30?
Day one, there's 0 Icosa. In theory, day 30, if people kind of end their minimum stake from the staking pool, but there's also a way that you can mint instant Icosa with another function called the HSI buyback, which is essentially the opportunity for you to take a HSI stake and sell it to the Icosa contract. The way it calculates how much Icosa to give you is your borrowable Hedron divided by the hex share rate on the time, on the day that you sell it. So kind of the more B shares your stake has, the more borrowable Hedron it has, plus, you know, the better the share rate, so the earlier on you do it, the more Icosa you'll get, because you know, there's a lower number of, you know, the divisor is now a lower number. So it's kind of like it's a way for you to sell a HSI to get instant Icosa, and then the contract will borrow against that HSI, obviously default on the payments because it's not going to make repayments for that advance, and then in 90 days that'll go to the liquidation auction. So yeah, there likely will be Icosa, but as it launches, there's 0. And then obviously the only way to guarantee you get it day one is to sell your HSI to the HSI buyback.
So if I created like $100 HSI tomorrow, what would that look like for Icosa shares?
How many B shares are you gonna get for $100? Well, like let's just go off 1,000 B shares, so 1 T share. So if you were to create 1,000 B share HSI and sell that to the contract for 5555, there's a 10% bonus for creating a 5555. You'd get 263.8 Icosa based on today's share rate. So, you know, that's your intrinsic value of, you know, the cost basis of your Icosa that could then be seen intrinsically as the cost of creating that 1 T share 5555 HSI. Like, for example, if you were to spend $100 to yield 100 Icosa, you could say intrinsically I paid $1 for each Icosa, in theory, random numbers. So yeah, that's kind of the only way you can get into the Icosa pool day one, unless there's a Uniswap market that's liquid enough to take everybody's purchases. The only way to get into that Icosa staking pool and get that yield is to sell your HSI to the HSI buyback. So there's a bit of like stickiness in game theory there.
So you said 1,000 B shares at 555 would net 263 Icosa?
Yeah, 263.8. That's right. Yeah.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
There really probably shouldn't be a Uniswap pool until after the 14 days, right? Because either you can buy it for cheaper straight from the contract, or like why are you going to pay more on Uniswap? And who's going to, on the flip side, who's going to buy it from the contract and then go sell it for cheaper within the 14 days?
Yeah, and herein lies the it's almost like, for lack of a better expression, do you know, like the unstaking gotchas in Hex, like that word gotcha, it's almost like one of those. It's like a sticky, you know, because we're guaranteed that yield from the seeding of the pools. We're guaranteed that 41,000 Icosa per day per pool. So in theory, if you had 1 Icosa and you were the only person in the staking pool, you'd get 41,000 Icosa yield that day. So it's like, I either don't enter the staking pool, or like you said, there's not going to be a Uniswap pool. If it is, it's probably not going to be that liquid. You know, maybe the SA does something, but who knows? So it's like, I either don't go in the pool or I grab a HSI and sell it. And like, they're precious, right? Hex stakes in and of themselves are precious. So it's a lot of game theory, especially early on.
You know, which I have a question, because I was just watching the video from yesterday, and Crypto Sloth said something about price appreciation was favorable for Hedron, possibly over Icosa. But with what we were talking about earlier, I saw it the other way, no? Because of the correlation to the B shares to the T shares between the two.
So how do you mean exactly? Like, in terms of the Icosa price being correlated to the T share?
The Icosa is more correlated to the T share value, and then the B shares Hedron.
I mean, well, either way, the T share and the B share is just they're just shares, right? But just different denominations of them. But in terms of like Icosa, you could argue that it was T shares, because all it really is saying is, look, you know, the correlation comes in terms of the fact that if it costs you $100 to make a stake and get one T-share, just random number, just for ease of math, and then you yield X Icosa, you now have like a mental intrinsic value of what you've paid for that Icosa, essentially, right? So it's the case that until you get yield, why would you sell that Icosa for less? And by providing liquidity, you know, it's an effective sell if someone eats through that liquidity. So it's more the perception of the user that holds the Icosa just having that intrinsic value that they've paid for it, more than like a direct correlation or some kind of peg, you know?
Okay. All right.
And then obviously as the T-share ratchets up, you're going to get less Icosa for the same amount of B-shares. As the hex price ratchets up, both of those things happening will increase the virtual ceiling of sorts. Because like we said earlier, for as long as you can make $100 HSI and yield $120 of Icosa, people will likely take that arbitrage opportunity and pull the Icosa price back down to equilibrium. So it's now just $100 for $100. So as the hex price rises, that ceiling also rises. Or as the hex T-share rate ratchets up, the ceiling rises, you know? So both of those things will raise the ceiling over time. And that's where you'll see a correlation to the ceiling directly. And then maybe an indirect one, just because you have an intrinsic cost basis of the principal you're paying if you decide to get your principal from HSI buyback.
So this buying Icosa with stakes, does that go on forever? Or is that only 14 days also?
Yeah, that goes on forever. So that's one of the design intentions, to have some kind of like circular system. So, you know, like, let's say
I didn't know. That's interesting.
Yeah, and like say I'm earning a bunch of yield, and let's say there's low liquidity, day 1, day 2, day 3, I'm earning a bunch of yield, and it's like, well, you're going to see me now and say, hey, I want some yield. Okay, well, I have to sell a HSI to the buyback, and then 90 days that the HSI goes to liquidation auction, then people bid with Hedron, that Hedron gets burned, and burning Hedron increases yield in all 3 pools. That's how Icosa is minted to the pools, which then increases yield, which should in turn increase demand, increase kind of demand for the HSI buyback function. And it's like this circular system, and kind of all three pools have this kind of stickiness, and they're unique in their own way. But like globally, the system benefits Hedron, Hex, and Icosa itself. So yeah, it's very well thought out, I think.